Plastics are everywhere. Since the mid-20th century, humanity has produced more than 9 billion tons of plastic, a material that was meant to make life easier, but has instead become a deadly trap for nature and for humanity. It is well established that most plastic is never recycled. Professor Antonio Ragusa, an Italian obstetrician-gynecologist and researcher who first identified microplastic in the human placenta, explains how it continues its journey through the biosphere.
Of the millions and millions of tons of plastic we produce, less than 10% gets recycled. More than 90% is dumped into the environment. And when plastic gets dumped into the environment, it slowly breaks down into smaller and smaller particles, eventually becoming very small, microplastics, or even tiny nanoplastics. These particles travel down rivers, reach the seas, spread throughout the oceans, and enter the fish we later eat, so they end up back inside us.
The problem of microplastics has long been observed in ecosystems across the globe. Professor Sedat Gündoğdu of Çukurova University in Turkey, founder of a research group on microplastics and expert in marine biology and Mediterranean microplastic contamination, speaks about this growing concern.
I'm working on fish biology mostly. I was working on fish biology since 2016. During my PhD study, I recognized that all the sampling location that we work for biodiversity fully polluted with plastics, not only microplastics, because first we realized that the main problem is plastic itself.
Today we are accustomed to hearing the word microplastic, but there was a time when this term simply didn't exist. Professor Richard Thompson is a marine biologist at the University of Plymouth, director of the Marine Institute, officer of the Order of the British Empire, and fellow of the Royal Society. In his work, he was the first to describe microscopic plastic particles in the marine environment, laying the foundation for an entirely new field of research.
When I started to teach, I set the challenge to some of my students. They went out onto the shoreline, they collected samples of sand, and we started to look at them under the microscope. And from the very first samples, we could see pieces that did not look like sand grains, brightly colored pieces, red and blue. And it was then almost a kind of forensic journey to confirm their identity. And we confirmed that they were indeed plastics. We showed that they were present around the UK in a range of different habitats, in sediments and in the water column. And interestingly, in that first paper in 2004, my first paper on the topic, we used the term microplastics. And the term hadn't been used in this context for truly microscopic pieces before. There had been, and we referenced them in our paper, some studies of small pieces of plastic before, but we went smaller than anybody else. We showed this bioavailability. We showed the temporal trend of increasing over time.
The ocean is the main reservoir of plastic accumulation. It already contains more than 200 million tons of plastic waste, and this amount continues to grow every day. It is important to understand that plastic does not disappear. Under the influence of sunlight, waves, salinity, and mechanical friction, it breaks down into microplastics and nanoplastics. Microplastics are plastic particles smaller than 5 millimeters in size, while nanoplastics are smaller than 1 micrometer, about 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. There are about 350 trillion microplastic particles in the surface layer of the ocean alone. Yet the real number is far greater. Scientists estimate that roughly 90% of nanoplastic particles are too small to be detected by current analytical instruments. As water evaporates from the surface of oceans and other bodies of water, microplastic particles rise into the atmosphere together with the water vapor. Dr. Dusan Materic, an environmental analyst at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, Germany, leads a research group dedicated to the study of nanoplastics. Dr. Materic investigates atmospheric nanoplastics at the Sonnenblick Observatory in Austria, the oldest high-altitude research station in Europe.
And for those nanoplastics, that fragments from big fibers, because of UV weathering, because of just mechanical forces, those shredding nanoplastics are much more potent to stay in the air for a long, long period, and that means picked up and brought even here at 3,106 meters above sea level. So what we discovered is that we have nanoplastics across all the stations, and we have nanoplastics even in the deepest ocean environment, and our deepest point is below 5,000 meters.
Micro and nanoparticles in the atmosphere can travel thousands of kilometers, crossing from one continent to another. This is noted by Dr. Elke Ludewig from Austria, who heads the Sonnenblick Observatory and the European Center for Cloud Ambient Intercomparison, where the transport of these particles and the effects of this process are recorded.
We know from different cases that we have really long transports of particles from, for example, Japan up to here, or Canada, for example. There are two examples I can tell you. The one is the accident in Fukushima. It took about 11 days until particles, aerosol particles with a higher radiation, received the Sonnenblick Observatory. Another example was in 2025, on the 9th of June, there was a kind of transport, an air mass from Canada received the station here. We could see it in the sky. Of course, we could see it in our data that we had higher aerosol concentration, but the really impressive moment was, and that's why it's also important to have stuff up here, we could really smell the burn in the air. And this lasts for the whole day. So there you can see how intense effects somewhere on the globe, especially on the North Hemisphere, can be, and it's still transported hundreds of kilometers around the North Hemisphere, and we can measure it here and show what it is.
Atmospheric micro and nanoplastics then return to Earth with precipitation, falling with rain or snow and settling in forests, on farmland, and across grasslands, where they seep into the soil and penetrate plants. This is happening all over the planet, in both the northern and southern hemispheres. Liliana Cáceres-Sánchez, MSc in Science, Technology and Health, a biologist specializing in ecotoxicology and environmental protection, and a researcher at the Center for Research in Exact Sciences and Engineering at the Bolivian Catholic University San Pablo, notes that microplastics are present in natural environments, in living organisms, and in food products.
In recent years, we've conducted analyses of soil, air, and both surface and groundwater in Cochabamba. We have also examined lakes and lagoons, and in all of these samples, we have found microplastics. The fact that we found microplastics even in areas with no human presence suggests that microplastic particles are actively moving through the environment. In addition, we identified their presence in food and in living organisms. We detected microplastics in milk and other pasteurized products such as yogurt. They were also found in wild animals, for example, in the Titicaca water frog and in fish from a lake near Cochabamba called Angostura. These findings confirm that microplastics have already become part of our food chain and ecological chain.
Due to microplastic pollution, 1 in 10 grains of the world's 3 main food crops, rice, wheat, and corn, may die before harvest. In addition, researchers from the University of Catania have found high concentrations of microplastic particles in apples, pears, carrots, potatoes, lettuce, and broccoli. Overall, apples and carrots contained the highest levels of contamination, and fruits were found to have more plastic particles than vegetables. On dairy farms in several countries, microplastic particles have been found in samples of hay and other types of cattle feed. The presence of microplastics has also been confirmed in the milk and meat of cows and sheep, as well as in the lung tissue of pigs and in the stomachs and intestines of domestic ducks. This means that plastic has now become inseparable from livestock farming. Scientists from the University of Newcastle in Australia estimate that the average person today consumes around 250 grams of plastic per year through food, the weight equivalent of 50 plastic bags. Moreover, humans inhale micro and nanoplastics. According to studies, an adult can inhale up to 106,000 microplastic particles during a 2-hour walk in a large city. And in areas near bodies of water, that number significantly increases. We encounter micro and nanoplastic every day when we brush our teeth, take a shower, eat, run errands, go for a walk, wear our clothes, use household appliances, or take medications, and when we are working on a computer, riding public transport, drinking coffee on the go, shopping in a supermarket, or relaxing outdoors. Micro and nanoplastics are everywhere, and we barely notice how deeply these particles have become embedded in our everyday lives today.
There are 3 ways plastic gets into the body: through inhalation, through the skin, and through food. And what happens next? It enters the bloodstream. Until fairly recently, about 15 years ago, people thought plastic was inert. And in fact, if you look at these plastic pellets, not microplastics but larger macroplastics, even if you put them in water, they just sit there quietly. It seems like they don't interfere much with the environment. But once they break down into micro and nanoplastics, they get into the human body through those 3 pathways, enter the bloodstream, and from there reach all the parenchymal tissues, that is, the organs, kidneys, liver, heart, arteries, veins, placenta, breast milk.
Micro and nanoplastics have already become an inseparable part of the human body. They accumulate in the tissues of the intestines, heart muscles, and in the endocrine and reproductive organs, disrupting their functions. There isn't a single place in the human body they cannot penetrate. Studies show that the highest concentrations of nanoplastic have been found precisely in human brain tissue. Professor Lucas Kenner, a pathologist, cancer researcher, director of the Christian Doppler Laboratory for Applied Metabolomics, and scientific director of the Micro-1 project studying microplastic and its effects on health, explains how micro and nanoplastic particles can evade the body's defense mechanisms and reach the brain within just a few hours.
And we found out that particles which are in the bloodstream and cover themselves with cholesterol molecules, they easily can enter the blood-brain barrier, which is a very strict body barrier and protects the brain from toxic outside or even therapeutic substances. So it's, it's difficult, for instance, to treat brain tumors because the blood-brain barrier is so strict also for medications. But particles can enter quickly because they cover themselves with molecules will help them enter the blood-brain barrier. And this is for me, it was really very striking to see that, that these particles in 2 hours after we give them an oral gavage, they're already in the brain.
Scientists at the University of New Mexico have found that in every gram of brain tissue in middle-aged individuals, there are about 4,900 micrograms of plastic. This means that today, around 0.5% of the human brain is composed of plastic. Simple calculations show that the human brain contains on average around 7 grams of plastic, roughly the weight of a plastic teaspoon. And such a teaspoon is already inside the human head. It is well known that micro and nanoplastics are dangerous because of toxic chemical additives they contain, such as phthalates and bisphenols. Treating diseases associated with just 3 chemicals of the most toxic additives found in plastics costs humanity $1.5 trillion a year. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, as overall more than 16,000 chemical compounds are used in the production of various types of plastics, each carrying its own potential risks to human health. Yet there is another factor, one far more dangerous and still vastly underestimated, in how nanoplastics affect the human body. It is precisely this factor that allows nanoplastics to easily penetrate the body's protective barriers, and once inside, they are virtually impossible to remove.
The destructive impact of plastics at the chemical level has already been examined in another documentary, A Trap for Humanity, part of which focused on the toxic additives in plastics and their devastating effects for human health. Now, the dangers from chemicals are, of course, the most visible and widely discussed part of the problem. But as our investigation continued, we realized that the true danger of plastics lie beyond the chemistry, extending much deeper into the realm of physics. To understand why plastic particles are so dangerous, we must first understand their unique physical properties.